Second, let me just get this going. Perfect. All right. We are a relatively smaller group today, so let's keep it interactive. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on chat window, or given that it's a smaller group, feel free to even unmute and ask questions. At different points and during this presentation, there will be logical points where I can check these questions and address them. There's quite a lot of content to cover, so I'll keep the introduction parts fairly brief. I'm Logesh Balasubramaniam. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and running the consulting sales for the Southern Eastern region. But um, as part of my role, I'm actually, before transitioning into this role that I'm doing, have a background, 20 years background in the PeopleSoft application as a solution architect on the technology side, HCM side, have myself worked at different higher education institutes as part of the IT team as well. So have a depth of experience both on the student side and on the technology platform that we are going to be discussing today about Activity Guide framework as well. So with that said, we'll get started. A quick introduction about who we are. SpearMC as an organization, many of you in this conference might have come across us before. We have been quite heavily involved with PeopleSoft, specifically in the thought leadership space of these presentations and conferences for many years now. And in addition to that, we are an organization that we're heavily focused on training. So one of these avenues you might have come across us earlier, we are now part of Mythics organization. And with Mythics now we have a much larger presence and in different ways and forms. One of that is contract vehicles across various federal, state, local, and higher ed institutions. We are now part of, we have existing contract vehicles that we can easily leverage to work with you all. And in addition to that, our combined entity also provides services across the entire Oracle suite of products, not just PeopleSoft, but more broader as well. But specific to this conference, we are heavily focused on PeopleSoft. That's our core strength and area of expertise. So PeopleSoft and PeopleSoft transitioning to Oracle Cloud is what I have been focusing on. And I'm not sure if any of you were in my presentations earlier. This is my third presentation today on different topics. So this one is specifically on Activity Guides framework. So we'll go through that. Now, as I mentioned before, when it comes to training, SpearMC is synonymous with training for PeopleSoft, and we do have various training classes posted on our website for public registration over the next few months. Here is a link, a QR code to take you directly to the website. In addition to that, as part of this presentation, towards the end of the slide deck, there are some slides which has our upcoming classes as well. So something that you can check out as well. Now, please bear with me. I'm already feeling a bit of uncomfort with my voice. It's been back-to-back sessions in the last couple of hours. So I'll try to take it a little bit quieter as I go through these slides. So if I haven't mentioned earlier, feel free to use the chat window to post any questions. We'll review them as we go. Now, for those of you who are new to the topic here, activity guides, the reason I say that is activity guides as a framework has been in PeopleSoft application for many years now. I would say close to 10 years now. And each product pillar, like the HCM finance applications, have been taking it up, adopting it at a different rate. The students, the campus solutions, the student product is one that I would say has been recently more active. They were, I would say, late to the game in terms of adoption of activity guides as a framework, but in the last couple of years, we have seen new activity guides coming into the application. So the reason I call that out is, so technically this is not a very new area, specifically within the student application, universities using the student systems. Within the student system, it's a relatively new, so we are getting a lot of interest from higher ed specifically in terms of adopting activity guides, both activity guides that are delivered by Oracle and activity guides that customers are creating for themselves. Now, At a fundamental level, an activity guide is a framework that is being delivered to create tailored, guided processes. And when PeopleSoft application that's been around for 25, 30 years or more than 30 years now, the fundamental focus has been on performing individual transactions at a different component level. When you have to do certain activity, go to a particular place and do it. Enrollment, go here and do it. When you have to do a grading, go to a particular place in the application and do it. But when you have activities that have to be done in a certain sequence and certain way, then it makes sense to bring them together into a guided process. And more so for when the activities are to be done by users who are not active in the system all the time. We consider as like self-service users who spend a lot less time on the system when compared to administrative users, and may not be familiar with 10 different places to go and do 10 different things. It would be beneficial to bring all those things that they need to do together into a single place in order to complete a series of tasks. And a good example that I always talk about is, and one of the very early use cases that was introduced with Activity Guide framework is the onboarding process. When we start as an employee at an organization, pretty much every one of us would have gone through this, where we have to go through and do a sequence of steps within our first day, first week, first month, and so on, to go through our onboarding. And an activity guide framework is like a perfect fit for such a kind of an activity where multiple bespoke steps have to be done, but they're all done as part of a particular process. So making it a guided process makes it very easy for the end users to do it. So that's where it all started, and across the applications, HR, finance, student systems, there are many processes now that are delivered as guided processes. Now, when it comes to activity guides, this is for information at this stage. I'm assuming many of you, since this particular session is part of the student systems track, I'm assuming many of you are focused on the PeopleSoft Campus Solution student product. So consider this as information only. Within the HCM and finance applications, there are many processes that are delivered as guided process through Activity Guides framework. Here is a list of them. And within the campus solution application, there are many processes as well. However, they are categorized into two groups here. One is the fluid activity guides, and the other is the classic activity guides. And the difference here is, as I mentioned before, Activity Guides as a framework released a long time ago. Under the initial stages, until few years ago, the Activity Guides framework was used within the classic user interface, the older forms of pages that were used in the application. They were using Activity Guides as well. And in the recent years, Activity Guides have been used in the fluid user interface. So here, this breakdown that you see here is basically to call out what guided process are available in the application, in the student system, and what format they follow. However, apart from this delivered activity guide processes, there are, over the years, we have seen many customer adopt custom processes using these activity guides as well. They create their own activity guides to pull together the different steps they do for certain processes to make it a guided process. I'll show you some use cases as well on that before we get into the demo system to go through a demo of a prototype student guide that I have built to highlight the various functions within the guided process. All right. Meanwhile, I'll check to see if there are any questions at this stage. Nothing so far, but as I mentioned, feel free to post your questions as well onto the chat window. All right. What I wanted to go through is, before I get into the system to show demo, wanted to talk about few use cases where we have deployed guided processes for customers based on their own requirements. These custom use cases, and these are not processes that are delivered by Oracle, but customer-defined processes. So in this case, there was a customer who wanted a they want their users, in this case, all their employees, to go into the system and on an annual basis review a set of policies and guidelines, mission statement, and faith, etc., and then acknowledge that they have completed that, and then also had to review their employee handbook for the upcoming year and acknowledge that as well. So it was a two-step guided activity that we did, where they could go in, complete step one, review their revised mission and statement of faith, complete it, and then go through the next step. So it's a two-step guided process for that function where um, they go through and complete these two functions. One important item that I want to call out, the reason to add this use case is that when it comes to a guided process definition, there are various places you go into the application and do certain tasks. For example, I earlier called about the onboarding step, but that's a very simple example that many of us can easily relate. So I'll continue to use that as a scenario to explain different things throughout this presentation. So when we onboard into a new company, we would have to do things like review and update our address, review and update our emergency contacts, phone information. All these could be different sets of information that we add in different places. Now, typically, all these pages we would have access an employee even multiple years down the line. If you're working in the organization, we will have access to those pages. So whenever our phone number changes or our address changes or our emergency contact changes, we can go and update it. But during onboarding, we will be doing them together, right? So when we talk about different steps in the guided process, there are steps that users can do outside the guided process anytime, right? That doesn't mean those cannot be in the guided process. So guided process stands in parallel to what users can do outside the guided process, right? I don't have to go through a guided process to just change my address, but if I'm doing it as part of a guided process, I'm probably doing it as part of multiple other steps, right? So that's a difference I wanted to call out. Another example where we frequently see this is during the open enrollment part of our employment. Every year we go through, and in October, November time frame, or in university's case, it might be a different time frame, a new start of a new academic year or so, we would review our benefits and elect new benefits, etc. At that time, we might be reviewing our address or change in our tax information, things like that, or change in our bank accounts. We will be doing those steps as part of guided process, but we might be doing those updates outside the guided process as well, if any time our address changes or our dependents change, etc. So that's an example. And the reason I'm calling that out is as part of the guided process framework, there are features that can be done outside, and there are features that are only available within the guided process. And a couple of examples here that I'm showing you, like the acknowledgement and employee handbook functionality, are features that are built within the guided process framework. When I go to the demo after a couple of slides, those are the things I'll be focusing on. That is what all you can do within this guided process, right? In addition to just asking users to complete some tasks, what all things that are feasible, right? So that art of possible use cases is what we're going to see. Now, there was another guided process where we had to create a process for employees to do a quick survey and acknowledgement before they return to office, returning from COVID. So this was a couple of years ago as well. In this case, it was a three-step process where they had to fill in a survey about their comfort level about returning to office, and then acknowledge about a policy about coming back to office, and make any attachments, etc. So that was a three-step process for a return to office survey. Another example use case for activity guides. And then here is another one, which is a multi-step process that was created that also had like policy acknowledgement and updating emergency contacts, doing a student survey, etc. So these are some basic examples. What I want to actually spend a lot of time is in the system doing the activity guide demo. Before that, I'll see if there are any questions. I don't see anything. It's good. But feel free to add any questions. But let me switch over to the application to do the demo. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'll be using the Campus Solution System PUM image version 34. So if there are any technology focused folks in the session, that's the version, application version that I'm using. Again, as I said, activity guides as a framework has been there for a very long time. So it's you don't the version that supports this goes really old. But specifically, I'm using one of the latest version, not the latest version, but image 34 is the one that I'm using for this demo. Now, for the purpose of showing what all is possible in terms of building guided process in the student system, I have created a complete new guided process as an example. I'm calling it a student journey. So I have a tile here that says student journey. So I'm going to the student journey. It has 0 out of 10 steps. So I have 10 steps in the process. I haven't completed any. So let me start that. And let me make it's already 110 degree. So let's start with what we see here. So the layout of an activity guide is going to look something like this in all cases. There are some configuration options to address, to do things a little bit differently, but majority of the guided process will have a layout like this, where you on the top have a header where you can provide what is the title of the activity guide itself. It's a student journey demo that I have added. And then comes the header section where you have 2 to 3 lines of information that you can bring in. In this case, I've just brought in the username, which is exactly my first initials and last name. But this could be the student name. This could have, if the guide is based on a particular context. If the guide is for the student, then you would bring in student name. If the guide is for the student and it's also for a particular term, then you can bring term information, the term title, term date, term start date and end date, things like that. You can bring in that information. So there can be a header and there can be a line level information in the header. And then on the right hand side, you have action buttons that shows up here. Exit and cancel, mark complete and next. All these are configurable, like what actions you want to be available, what they should be doing when they click the button. All those are configurable. So in this example, I've enabled this view. We'll go through and different pages. You will also, once I go to step 2, you'll see a previous button as well to navigate back. So there's a configurable section of actions here. Now, beneath that is on the left-hand side, we see a list of steps. And on the right-hand side is the detailed content area. Now, pretty much the entire list, what is the list of steps you want to have, what should be mandatory, what's are optional, what is the sequence of it, whether there should be any groupings and sub-steps, everything is configurable. Every single step is user customer defined in terms of what steps you want to have. And I'm starting my guided process with a welcome message, which is I have a welcome message, which is a broad message about exciting to have student join the university. And then I have a link to a video on YouTube. And so this is one feature where you can embed videos from external source. And so basically this is a link to a video on YouTube from University of Sydney in this example, and that they can watch from within the guided process. The use cases where this comes in handy is, let's say on an onboarding guide, you would have a video from, let's say from your executive leadership. It could be CEO or chancellor, vice chancellor, etc. Right. So depending upon the purpose of the guided process, if you have any video message to share, then that can be part of the welcome message here. All right. Typically, this is a step where I wouldn't need any actions to be done by the user, but I can say I've done that. I put in just a message. I'll mark this complete. I don't have to do that. It's only a video message. So I'll just looks like I haven't enabled that action. All right. Then to show an example, I have acknowledgement step that is added, which is once again Acknowledgement is like a sub framework that is configurable, so you can create your own acknowledgement. And you can see here I am acknowledging to something. I can This text is configurable. This the label, the the way the checkbox works is all configurable in here. And then I also have another one, which is a consent option that I have enabled as well. Your acknowledgement could have links. It could be a detail, it could be even a legal document where you can provide a link. They could click, it opens on another page where they acknowledge, where they review it and come back to acknowledge as well. So an acknowledgement could be a more detailed activity as well. All right. Now, when I do my acknowledgement, I can see that that's grayed out. I'm already done with the task. It also captures audit information about who's the user logged in and what's the date time stamp. It's captured in here. Now I can add additional fields as well. I added a name field, but looks like that was not like I don't have a name populated in the system for my ID, so it's left blank. But it is possible to capture additional data as well in here. Now, once again, I'm done with acknowledgement. Again, I haven't marked this as a mandatory step, but I can leave it as is, move forward. I can come back and visit it, etc. Now you can see that the first step, since I marked it complete, it is marked, the status is complete. But the second step, I didn't mark it complete. I just went and did that acknowledgement. So it says visitor. Now it's not a mandatory step, so it lets me proceed with it, but and the mark complete is optional. Now, the third kind of action here is I have given few pages where I'm able to add information or review information. Let's say personal details. I see my date of birth or gender, social security, names that I'm known by. Let's say all of this is good. I don't have to update anything, but I'm giving a confirm option. So I'm basically asking the person to confirm that nothing has changed. Now, when I do that, you can see the step is automatically marked complete. Because I did a confirmation that is already considering the task complete, you can now see the mark complete action doesn't exist here. I've confirmed and completed that process. So every single page here you can see is configured to meet certain needs and behaves differently. Welcome message enables video, acknowledgement is more receiving consent, and personal details is to review and confirm information. And then when it goes to other pages, you can literally bring in any page that is available to this user. Right now I'm a student, I'm performing this activity as a student. So any student facing page that you have can be brought into this guided process as a step, as long as they have access to do the task based on their role. Then that can be added as a step within the process. Let's say I am able to see my address looks good. I can confirm that no changes needed. Moving on to the next step. Let's say this is my contact information. And let's say I want to make a change to my contact information. Let's say my phone number, this is not going to be my secondary phone number. I want this to be a different phone number and make this preferred. I can do that as well. So in this case, I'm not just confirming a change, I'm just going through and making a change as well. I will save that information. Phone has been updated, but I do still have an option to either mark it complete or confirm. Now I'm good with this change number, so I'll go ahead and change that. Same as with emergency contact, nothing different there. I'll go ahead and leave the emergency contact as is, confirm it. Now I want to then go back and add a couple of show different kinds of steps as well. I think campus preferences is also basic information that is coming along that I can carry forward. Another aspect I want to highlight here is an important thing, which is, let's say we are going through the guided process, but you would have noticed that any information that is already in the system is already available here, right? Meaning, if I had went in and updated as a student, went to my self-service homepage and updated my contact details there, When they go into the guided process, it's going to show up whatever is the latest information for that particular page component data in the system is what's going to appear here. It doesn't matter whether they did it within the guided process or outside the guided process. The underlying data structure is the same. So if, for example, as part of their registration, if they already filled in their details, it's all getting populated here, right? They're only confirming. So I just want to make sure, even if I go and do changes outside the guided process, it's going to reflect here because all these pages are referring to a single source of information. And guided process is nothing but a framework that sits on the top of it to basically making the user to go it in a structured way rather than ad hoc way. That's the whole purpose of it. Okay. So the next example I want to show here is that within a guided process, you can make external content available as well. So as you see here, I clicked on the student aid home, and student aid home is actually linking to an external website. In this case, I've just picked up a random website from my region, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and you can see that that's fully accessible within the guided process. We haven't left the PeopleSoft application, but the website is available, and it even would let me to go through and navigate and do the tasks, etc. Now, few things to remember here is, for example, let me move out of the cost page, and what I wanted to talk about is the reason to bring in an external content into the guided process is to make it seamless for, let's say, students when they're going through a particular process. If there are activities to be done outside PeopleSoft, then they can be accessed from here. However, PeopleSoft wouldn't be able to track anything about what they do on those external websites. So let's say if in this external website, it lets me to fill and submit a form, right? I don't know if there is a form here. Let's say done it. It's asking me to do something, and if that is secured or if that's done on a separate place, those may not be available. And if a user saves any information on a third-party website, PeopleSoft is not going to know that, right? Whether a user filled in a form or submitted a form, etc. So the purpose to give access to external content is to make it easy for students, but if a student goes in and submits any information, PeopleSoft wouldn't know that information, right? For example, I clicked on this link, apply now for federal student aid. It opened up a new window, and students could go ahead and fill that in, but PeopleSoft wouldn't know whether they completed it. So if you want anything to be tracked here, like completion status, then you're relying on the user to provide that. For example, if they've done that, they can come here and mark complete to say, yeah, I did that. I'm good with it. Now you can say that student activity is complete. But whether the student actually completed or not is not verifiable for PeopleSoft. Okay, just something to keep in mind. Now, moving along, the next kind of step here I wanted to talk about that comes in very handy as part of the guided process, ability to create surveys to your users. So in this case, let's say I have created a survey for my students. And as typically you want to link the survey to the process they are doing. So in this case, it's a student journey. So my questions are going to be about the student journey, right? And within this questionnaire, you have a lot of flexibility to define what kinds of questions you want to ask. Every question, every answer is all entirely configurable, customer defined questions and answers. How clear and helpful was the information provided? Let's say very clear. How would you rate the orientation program? Extremely effective. What were you able to access support services? I'm not very sure about that. How would you rate this process? I would say extremely valuable. And you could ask students to provide a more open-ended feedback as well. So let's say in particular for now. and provide this information and save it. Now, there are configurations options as part of the survey, a questionnaire, to say whether they should only be able to submit it once or should they be allowed to edit it if they change their mind later. Before the entire guided process complete, they can come back and change as well. But in this particular example, I have set up the survey to be submitted once and not editable. So it gives me a message: answers cannot be changed once the page is saved. Select OK to save, cancel, or confirm, right? So it's basically getting a confirmation stating that I can't change it after it is done. So I'm giving OK. Then that particular step is complete. Thank you for completing the survey, and it becomes non-editable. Okay. So that particular task is complete. Now, you can notice here it still says visited. It hasn't marked complete. It requires some additional background config to enable that. But for now, I can mark this as complete manually and go to the next step. And the final step in the process of a guided process, an activity guide, is always a summary page that shows like this, all the steps they have done, what are visited, what are complete, and a message that you want to add. That's all tailored message that you can add to communicate to the users about what they need to do next, etc. You can use the page for that as well. Now, let's say I'm done with all of this. Now, if I exit this, it's going to basically say 7 out of 10 completed. We know that there were a few steps that I did not mark complete. And whether what needs to happen after, on the last step after they complete it, like there are options to provide additional action buttons here to complete the process or close the process, things like that can be done as well. Okay, so this is sort of an example prototype guided process to show what all different things, possibilities of activities that can be included in a guided process to get students to complete them in an intuitive way, one step at a time, and going through finishing a process. All right. I'll pause here to see if there are any questions. All right. I don't see any other questions. Feel free to, as I said, it's a small group. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute and clarify as well. Before I switch back from the demo on back to the session. Anyone have any questions? All right, I see something coming from a technical.
There's one put in the chat.
Yeah, all right, thank you. For activity guide, can it pull fluid as well as classic plus component? Absolutely, yes. So when it comes to the individual steps, it doesn't matter whether you are using fluid or classical plus. It's the end content can be anything. As I said, it can be even a non-PeopleSoft page. It doesn't matter. So you could do all of that. All right. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so if there are no further questions, let me go back to the presentation and get into more details about activity guides, a lot more information. Now, activity guides, when it comes to activity guides, we do have different kinds of training and training classes that are available, workshops that we run, depending upon what clients need. For example, we have had scenarios where customers wants to deploy delivered guides. Then it's a relatively straightforward process. We need to tweak the delivered guides to work with the custom business process you may have. And we also have more hands-on one-day workshop-based training program for customers who want to create their own guided process. Like the example that I showed just now, we have a one-day training class where by end of the training class, you're able to define that whole guide. You can able to create your own guided process like that one that we just demoed. Okay. So just be aware of those things because what we are going to see now after the demo is a little bit more in-depth content in terms of how it all comes together, how it works, right? That's the whole idea behind for the second part of this session. through. So pretty much all of this is what we see in our in our, what we saw in our demo, right? It can have PeopleSoft and not PeopleSoft content as steps. It supports videos, images, rich HTML content, meaning links, bolded content, underlined content, things like that. There is a document management framework within the activity guide process. We didn't see that in the example, but I showed it in the screenshot earlier, where if you want to let your users add documents or review documents, acknowledge documents, there could be a guided the step within the process to do that as well. So there is a document management framework within that. Policy acknowledgement, we saw that. Questionnaire surveys, we saw that. So each of that item, like document management, policy acknowledgement, questionnaire survey, all those are like sub frameworks that integrates with the activity guide framework. So each one has its own config, which is then linked together using this master framework called the activity guide framework. Okay. Then multi-user guides. The multi-user guides are functions that were, I would say, not relatively new. It's been around for a few years now. But when the guided process originally came out, they were considered to be single user guides, meaning it is the process that we went through as a student is done by one student, and every student have their own guided process that they go through, right? But later, when there were use cases where within a guided process, if multiple users have to collaborate, a good example is like an offboarding guide that was released in the HR application, which is um, some steps are done by the employees and some steps are done by the manager as part of the offboarding process. So within the guided process, we saw 10 steps in our example. There might be one or two steps that may need to be done by an admin. And students might do some activities. Then the enrollment advisor may have to go in and do some activity, right? So multi-user guides are supported now. That functionality has been around for a while. Within the student system, I'm not sure if there is any example of multi-user guide, but it is definitely feasible to build one. Okay. You can, one of the very good features is you can build your guided steps with due dates and dependencies. We have done that at multiple sites where we saw 10 different steps. But then for some steps, there might be specific dates they need to complete by. Let's say, for example, the acknowledgement step, they need to do it in day one or first week, depending upon the significance of it. If certain dates need to be enforced, then it would show up that it will show the due date along with the label here. And when it becomes overdue, it will show overdue. There is a notification framework to notify them if it becomes overdue, things like that. So there is a very strong due date management and notification framework as part of activity guides. Then dependency management has come in handy as well when you have to complete certain steps before you can do certain other steps, right? That can be configured as well. Like you may have to verify your address before you may have to review or add your bank account, something like that. Like we have seen this in multiple HR guides where you have to complete an acknowledgement before you can submit a life event. When marriage or something happens, if you want to change your benefits, you may have to do some pre-tasks before you can do that. So those dependencies between the steps can be controlled as well. Okay, and we already spoke about the email notifications. And another important feature of activity guides is template assignments, meaning when we define a guided process, we can define multiple variations of the guided process. Meaning, let's say you are going through a student onboarding process. The student onboarding process may be different for different kinds of students. You might do an undergraduate program might have 5 steps. A postgraduate program might have 7 steps. So you could define the student journey as one template for undergraduate, one template for postgraduate, one template for executive programs, things like that. And depending upon the type of enrollments, you could automatically assign the correct guided template for them. So it is one process overall, which is the student journey. But within that, you have different templates to assign based on different parameters. So creating different templates, automating assignments of templates based on rules is all part of the activity guide framework. Okay, so very rich, comprehensive, elaborative framework of content of um, to manage your guided process needs. So we have had deployed guides where we had to pretty much use all of these functions. When it comes to guided process, it could get complicated really quickly, and we have had scenarios where pretty much all of these features and functionalities have been used at different customer sites. I'll pause to see if there are any questions before taking further. Any questions verbally as well? Please feel free to unmute and clarify as well. Okay. All right. If there is nothing, let's move forward. All right. Now, as we go further deeper into this conversation, I'll try to keep the information at a fairly summary level because some of this could get very detailed and I wouldn't say technical, but more in depth into system, but where I'm not sure if all users are have that level of system configuration expertise to be able to understand this. So I'll try to keep this information at a summary level, but feel free to ask any questions so that that might drive some additional points that I may want to share as well. Okay. So I have been talking about the activity guide framework, like from a system terminology, it is called as an activity guide composer framework. And I'll expand this section and I can go through this in a very summary level is within that framework, there are multiple terminologies. I have already mentioned about these things, but here it's more of a mapping to what does what. There is something called as an activity guide category. That is the overarching thing, like student journey is an activity guide category. So that sits at the topmost layer. Within that, there will be different templates. So one or many templates. So student journey for executive programs, student journey for undergraduate, student journey for postgraduate programs. We already spoke about activity guide notifications. When things become overdue, when things get assigned, there can be system delivered notifications. Template assignment, we already spoke about. If a person has enrolled into an undergraduate program, then assign them the undergraduate journey, right? So the templates can be automated as long as the rules can be black and white, clearly defined. When these events happen, do this, then that can be automated. And then finally, once the activity guides are assigned and being used, there is an elaborate functions to manage those guides as well. Like if a person has issues in between and had to restart something, or they completed something incorrectly and they want to resubmit an acknowledgement, or any administrative task that needs to happen once the process begins, there is ability to do that. Okay. Now, these are going into a lot more details. So as I said, I'll try to keep it at a fairly high level. Basically, the next few slides are about how all this information comes together. And within the activity guide framework itself, we spoke about the activity guide categories and templates, etc. And as this particular framework has evolved, consider this as the version that is now there is like Gen 2 version, meaning earlier when the activity guide framework was first introduced, it was predominantly a technical focused process where you need to have a technical person or a developer or a technical consultant in your team to work with to configure and deploy this guided process. But as the usage of this increased, the activity guide composer framework made it extremely useful for both the business analyst kind of a functional user or a subject matter expert to play a role, and there are easy configurations that they can manage on their own, and then there is a separate set of underlying things the technical team can do to enable the end user to manage it. So these two comes in very handy, so that once the category on the underlying base definitions are defined, then the end users can make the minor changes that they can do online. For example, let's say in the guided process that we saw, there were 10 steps. If the source information for all the 10 steps are defined, which requires technical knowledge of configuring it, like what does personal details should go to? When I click student survey, where should it go? When I click student aid, what is the end page that it should load? Once the technical parts are defined, then the functional, like the business analyst and the individual administrative users within the departments, for example, can manage what should be the sequence of these tasks. And after some time, do you want to change any of these things? Do I need to change the grouping of these things? Those things can be easily managed by a configuration. So the guided process framework that is available now, Activity Guide Composer framework, splits the tasks that can be done by the business users versus the task that needs to be done by the technical users, making it easy segregation between the two different roles. And that's the background behind the next few slides that I wanted to call out. Okay, that's the difference between what is being done where. All right. And then I spoke about the questionnaire framework. It is a standalone framework where questions, answers, everything gets defined and then linked to the activity guide itself. So here is a quick screenshot of where the questionnaire framework is configured. And in these pages here, I notice a couple of things. I see the alignment when I in the presentation, what I see the alignment is messed up a little bit where the text is going behind the screenshot here. But I have also provided the detailed links here. So if there are anyone who is interested to go in depth in terms of how this works, then there is detailed links in every page to understand more about that particular framework. Okay. But since this is like more of a possibility sessions, I'm keeping it fairly high level. Okay. And we spoke about the acknowledgement framework. We saw an acknowledgement example. So that is also a configurable section where you can define what kind of information needs to be captured when it comes to an acknowledgement. And there is a link to that framework. And as you can see here on the right hand side, it's an effective dated configuration. You're building your acknowledgement using individual building blocks. And then you can define what audit fields you want to capture as part of the acknowledgement as well. So all these are, I would consider sort of activities that can be done by the business users. There isn't any technical coding needed to do these tasks because all these are done online using config pages in a very building blocks kind of an approach, one step at a time. Now, a typical process to follow to create a complete new guided process like the one example that I showed in terms of student journey would follow these steps. First, I can get started with a questionnaire category and create a questionnaire template, the questionnaire that I want to use. Within the questionnaires, there are options to reuse questions from the past. There are questions, there is something called smart answers where you can ask the system to give a 5-point answer option. You don't have to define every point yourself. A 5-point answer option might be excellent, very good, good, bad, very bad, etc. So there is a smart answer options available as well. And then you work with the acknowledgement category. If your guided process has an acknowledgement, then you define an acknowledgement category and an acknowledgement template, the screenshot that we saw earlier, and then work with the activity guide category, which is the underlying foundational configuration, and then create templates, different templates for the guided process for different groups of students or employees, and then assign those templates to the users, and then create a mechanism they can access the templates, which is through tiles, like the example that we saw. Okay. So that's the typical process that is followed to deploy the configure and deploy the activity guides. Here are some additional resources. In addition to the links on the pages, I have provided a couple of very useful YouTube videos, links here. One, a complete more detailed session on playbook to create and deploy custom activity guides. Then there is another delivered video from Oracle on the activity guide composer framework itself, very useful to get an overview about the process involved. Very similar to what we discussed today uh, in terms of what all it can do, how it can be done, etc. All right. I think that pretty much covers all the items I had in the session. I want to see if there are any other questions. I don't see anything in the chat window, but feel free to update or unmute yourself and ask any questions before we wrap up. All right. If we don't have any further questions, just a couple more slides in here. As I mentioned before, various sessions.